The Keddie Cabin Murders, a horrific crime in the quiet of California's Sierra Nevada. The tranquility of the Sierra Nevada mountains in Northern California was shattered on April 12, 1981. In a small, isolated cabin in the Keddie Resort area, a horrific crime was about to unfold. The brutal slaying of 3 members of a family, Gloria, her son John, and his friend Dana, would leave behind a mystery that endures to this day. The Keddie Cabin Murders, as they would come to be known, would become one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American history. The family at Keddie Cabin 28 Keddie Resort, a modest vacation spot nestled in the remote wilderness of Plumas County, was a place where people sought peace and solitude away from the bustle of city life. It was an idyllic location, offering the kind of quiet that most would only dream of. For Gloria and her children, Keddie represented the hope for a new beginning after years of personal struggle. Gloria Jean Martin, a woman in her early 30s, had separated from her abusive husband, and she was starting fresh with her children. She had 4 kids, 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina, and 5-year-old Rick. They had moved into Cabin 28, a small, rustic retreat tucked in the woods, hoping for a new life filled with opportunity and peace. They were joined occasionally by friends or family members, seeking solace in nature. On the fateful night of the murders, Gloria had invited her son's friend, Dana Wingate, to stay with them. Dana, a 17-year-old high school student, was a familiar presence in the household, spending much of his time at Cabin 28 after striking up a close friendship with John. Little did anyone know that this night would mark the end of their lives. The discovery of the crime scene on the morning of April 12, 1981, Sheila, the eldest child, was staying with friends in a nearby cabin. When she returned home, she found the door to Cabin 28 ajar. The scene inside would haunt her for the rest of her life. Gloria, John, and Dana had been viciously attacked. Gloria's body was discovered slumped in the living room, her face almost unrecognizable, a brutal gash on her head. John and Dana were both found in separate rooms, also bearing deep stab wounds. The level of violence was staggering. They had been bound with medical tape, repeatedly stabbed, and bludgeoned with blunt objects. It was clear that this was no ordinary robbery gone wrong or an act of rage. It was something far darker. The youngest children, Tina and Rick, were nowhere to be found. The authorities were initially unsure whether the killers had taken them or if they had fled. The terror of the situation compounded when investigators discovered that Tina's bed was missing, suggesting she had been taken in the middle of the night. It was an agonizing unknown for Gloria's surviving children and the authorities investigating the crime. The investigation begins when law enforcement arrived at the scene. They were struck by the brutal nature of the crime. Detective Jerry W. L. Bell, along with a team of investigators, began combing through the cabin and surrounding area for evidence. The crime scene had been meticulously staged. Nothing appeared to be missing, and there was no clear motive. This wasn't a typical burglary, and the killers had clearly taken their time. The first breakthrough came when a neighbor, who lived a few hundred yards away, reported seeing a car parked near the cabin around the time the murders were believed to have occurred. The car was described as a brown or beige sedan, but no license plate number was recorded. The witness also reported hearing sounds that suggested something violent was happening, though the remote nature of the area meant that no one else was around to offer further assistance. Investigators also discovered strange markings on the bodies. Some theorized that the killers had used a particular tool or weapon, but no definitive evidence of the weapon was found at the scene. The attack had been so violent and disorganized that it was clear the killer or killers had been acting out of a personal vendetta, yet no clear suspect emerged. The absence of Tina was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case. Was she dead, or had she been abducted by the killer? There were theories suggesting that she had been taken as a witness or even a deliberate target. The uncertainty surrounding her fate led to an even greater sense of dread as the case unfolded. Theories and suspects. As weeks passed and the investigation continued, several theories began to emerge. The first, and perhaps most widely discussed, was that the murders had been committed by someone with a personal connection to Gloria or her children. A background check revealed that Gloria had once been married to a man named Don Davis, and while he was a known abuser, he had no apparent motive for the killings. However, some speculated that his temper might have led to a violent outburst. Another possible lead came from Dana's life. He had friends who had recently been involved in drug-related activity, and some believed that the murders were linked to the local drug scene. However, this theory lacked concrete evidence and was quickly dismissed as investigators found no connections between Dana and known criminals. The most promising lead came from a neighbor named Marilyn, who reported seeing two men leave the cabin on the night of the murders. She described one man as tall and the other as short, but the descriptions were vague, and without further evidence, it was impossible to identify the men. The theory that the killers had been strangers to the family seemed plausible, yet the brutality of the crime suggested it was likely someone with a deep hatred or personal grudge against them. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the investigation was the lack of progress. The killer or killers seemed to have covered their tracks well, and no physical evidence was found to link anyone to the crime. The case began to grow colder by the day. The disappearance of Tina. The fate of Tina Martin remained a haunting question throughout the investigation. With no body found, the authorities held out hope that she had somehow survived the attack. Theories about her whereabouts ranged from the possibility that she had escaped and hidden nearby to the belief that she had been abducted. Despite extensive searches by law enforcement, volunteers, and search dogs, Tina was never found. The absence of her body left room for speculation. Some believed that Tina had been taken by someone connected to the crime, possibly to prevent her from being a witness. Others thought that she might have escaped in a frantic panic and perished somewhere in the wilderness, unable to survive on her own. Regardless of the theory, her disappearance was a painful void in the case, as it suggested that the killers might have had a much darker agenda than anyone had initially believed. Theories on the motive and unsolved mystery. As the years passed, the Keddie Cabin Murders became an unsolved mystery that lingered in the minds of the public and law enforcement alike. Theories about the crime persisted, but no new breakthroughs emerged to explain why the family had been targeted in such a violent and senseless manner. The case remained open for decades, with investigators revisiting old leads, re-examining the physical evidence, and even bringing in new forensic techniques. In 2013, the Plumas County Sheriff's Office announced that they had reclassified the case as a cold case, and were continuing their efforts to find answers. In 2016, the case received new attention when DNA testing on evidence collected from the crime scene revealed a match to a man named Martin Smart. Smart had been a friend of the family and had been in the cabin in the days before the murders. Smart had long been suspected of having knowledge of the crime, though he was never charged. Unfortunately, the evidence was inconclusive, and the mystery of who was truly responsible for the brutal murders of Gloria, John, Dana, and the disappearance of Tina remains unsolved to this day.